The moment Dr. Mariah Beth Rodriguez realized she was staring at her own death sentence. The coffee mug slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the floor. At 2:47 a.m., men surrounded by crime scene photos and psychological profiles in her FBI office, she discovered something that made her blood freeze. The serial killer she'd been hunting for 8 months was sleeping in her bed every night. The man she was planning to marry in 6 weeks was systematically murdering women who looked exactly like her. Mariah Beth had dedicated her career to understanding the darkest corners of the human psyche. As one of the FBI's leading criminal psychologists, she had profiled dozens of serial killers, analyzed their childhood traumas, and mapped the twisted pathways that led ordinary people to commit unspeakable acts. Her research on the development of antisocial personality disorder had revolutionized how law enforcement approached criminal investigations. She thought she understood evil better than anyone until evil moved into her apartment and proposed with a diamond ring. The irony wasn't lost on her now. Marcus, her fiancé, had been exhibiting every single warning sign she taught other agents to recognize, but somehow, love had made her blind to what should have been obvious. The superficial charm that had swept her off her feet during their first meeting at a psychology conference 3 years ago. The way he could lie so effortlessly that even she, a trained interrogator, believed every word. His complete lack of empathy when her father died last year, masked behind perfectly rehearsed expressions of concern that she now realized were nothing more than mimicry. The subtle manipulation tactics he used to isolate her from friends and family, executed so skillfully that she had thanked him for protecting her from toxic people. Mariah Beth's hands trembled as she reached for her case files, knowing that what she was about to discover would either save her life or seal her fate. 8 months ago, she had been assigned to profile an active serial killer terrorizing the Pacific Northwest. The perpetrator was methodical, intelligent, and had an intimate knowledge of police procedures that made him nearly impossible to catch. He left no physical evidence, seemed to anticipate every investigative move, and selected victims with chilling precision that suggested he was choosing them based on a specific psychological type. The profile Mariah Beth had developed painted a picture of someone highly educated, likely in law enforcement or criminal justice, with access to confidential information about ongoing investigations, someone exactly like Marcus. The pieces of the puzzle had been staring her in the face for weeks. Marcus worked as a forensic consultant, giving him access to crime scene information. He traveled frequently for work, always during the time frames when murders occurred in different cities. His laptop was password protected with military-grade encryption, something he claimed was necessary for client confidentiality. Most disturbing of all, he had started asking detailed questions about her profiling methods, claiming professional curiosity. Sarah's mind raced back to their conversations over dinner just last week. Marcus had casually mentioned how easy it would be for someone to commit the perfect murder if they understood police psychology. He had laughed when she called him morbid, saying that anyone in their field had to think about such things. At the time, She had found his intellectual approach to violence slightly unsettling, but ultimately dismissed it as shop talk between two professionals in related fields. Now, as she compared her psychological profile to her own observations about Marcus, the similarities were undeniable. The killer she was hunting exhibited narcissistic traits, viewing himself as intellectually superior to law enforcement. He demonstrated a need for control and power over his victims, selecting women who resembled a specific type. Sarah looked at the victim photos spread across her desk, and her stomach dropped. Every single woman looked remarkably similar to her: brunette, petite, professional, in their early 30s. The realization that she might be living with a serial killer sent waves of terror and disbelief through her body. Her training kicked in, reminding her that the most dangerous moment for any victim of a psychopath was when they realized the truth. If Marcus was indeed the killer, her life was now in immediate danger. She couldn't call the police without concrete evidence, and she couldn't confront him without risking everything. Sarah forced herself to think like the criminal psychologist she was trained to be. If Marcus was the killer, he would have contingency plans. He would be monitoring her behavior for any signs of suspicion. Any deviation from her normal routine could trigger a violent response. She needed to gather evidence while maintaining the facade of their relationship, knowing that one wrong move could make her the next victim. As she heard Marcus's key turning in the front door, Sarah quickly shuffled the case files back into their folders. Her heart pounded as his familiar footsteps approached her home office. When he appeared in the doorway with his characteristic charming smile, asking about her late-night work session, Sarah managed to smile back and lie about reviewing old cases. But behind her calm exterior, she was now studying every micro-expression, every word choice, every gesture through the lens of her own psychological training. The hunter had become the hunted, and Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about evil was about to be tested in the most personal and terrifying way possible. The next morning felt like stepping into a psychological experiment where Sarah was both the researcher and the subject. She observed Marcus over breakfast with the clinical detachment she usually reserved for analyzing criminals, noting how he buttered his toast with mechanical precision and asked about her day with perfectly calibrated interest. Everything about him suddenly seemed performative, as if she were watching an actor who had studied the role of the perfect boyfriend for years. Sarah had spent the sleepless night developing a strategy. She would conduct her own investigation while maintaining absolute normalcy in their relationship. Her plan required accessing Marcus's personal files, tracking his movements, and gathering concrete evidence, all while pretending to be the loving fiancé planning their wedding. The psychological toll of this deception was already eating away at her, but she knew that survival depended on becoming as skilled a manipulator as the man she suspected of being a killer. Her first opportunity came when Marcus left for a 3-day consulting job in Seattle. Sarah used her FBI credentials to run background checks she should have done years ago, discovering gaps in his employment history that coincided perfectly with unsolved murders across the Pacific Northwest. The pattern was so clear she wondered how she had missed it. But she knew the answer love had blinded her to what her professional training should have caught immediately. The most chilling discovery came when she found Marcus's hidden storage unit. Using skills learned from years of criminal investigations, Sarah picked the lock and discovered a carefully organized collection that made her blood freeze. Newspaper clippings about each murder, detailed maps of victim locations, and psychological analysis notes written in Marcus's handwriting. But the most terrifying item was a journal filled with observations about her own behavior, habits, and psychological patterns, as if she had been his longest-running case study. Reading Marcus's private thoughts about her felt like experiencing psychological torture. He had documented her vulnerabilities with clinical precision, noting exactly which emotional triggers would be most effective for manipulation. He had recorded her fears, her insecurities, even her sleeping patterns and daily routines. The journal revealed that their entire relationship had been an elaborate psychological experiment, with Sarah as an unwitting subject being groomed for purposes she didn't want to imagine. The journal entries became progressively darker over the past few months. Marcus had written extensively about the thrill of controlling someone with advanced psychological training, describing it as his ultimate challenge. He had documented how he planned to gradually increase his psychological pressure on her, testing how far he could push before she recognized the manipulation. The final entries suggested he was growing bored with the relationship and considering what he called the graduation ceremony. Sarah photographed everything with shaking hands, knowing she was gathering evidence that could save her life while simultaneously discovering the depth of her own victimization. The man she had planned to marry had been systematically studying and manipulating her for years, using her own field of expertise against her. The psychological violation felt almost worse than the physical danger she now faced. When she returned home, Sarah forced herself to maintain normal behavior while internally processing the horror of what she had learned. Marcus called from Seattle, his voice warm and loving as he asked about her day and told her how much he missed her. Every word he spoke now carried sinister undertones that made her skin crawl, but she matched his affectionate tone perfectly, knowing that her survival depended on this performance. That evening, Sarah made a decision that went against every protocol she had ever learned about handling dangerous criminals. Instead of immediately contacting law enforcement, she chose to gather more evidence while remaining in the relationship. She knew that without concrete proof of his crimes, Marcus's intelligence and legal connections could help him escape justice. More importantly, she realized that other women's lives might depend on her ability to definitively connect him to the murders. The psychological complexity of her situation was unlike anything she had encountered in her professional career. She was simultaneously the investigator and the potential victim, the expert and the manipulated subject, the hunter and the hunted. Every interaction with Marcus became a chess match where the stakes were literally life and death, and she had to outmaneuver someone who had been studying her psychological responses for years. As she prepared for bed in the home she had shared with the killer, Sarah understood that she was about to embark on the most dangerous investigation of her career. She would need to use every technique she had learned about criminal psychology, not to profile a distant subject, but to survive and gather evidence against the man sleeping beside her. The next few weeks would determine whether her expertise and understanding evil minds would be enough to outwit someone who had been using that same knowledge to manipulate her for years. Sarah's psychological training had taught her that psychopaths were master manipulators, but experiencing Marcus's tactics firsthand revealed layers of control she had never fully understood. Over the following weeks, she began to notice how he had systematically isolated her from her support network. Her best friend Lisa hadn't called in months, not because she didn't want to, but because Marcus had subtly convinced Sarah that Lisa was jealous of their relationship and spreading negative rumors about him. The manipulation had been so gradual and expertly executed that Sarah had internalized his perspective without realizing it. He had never directly forbidden her from seeing friends or family. Instead, he had planted seeds of doubt about their motivations and loyalty. When her sister expressed concerns about how quickly their relationship had progressed, Marcus had helped Sarah interpret those concerns as jealousy rather than genuine care. He had turned her own psychological knowledge against her, using technical terms and therapeutic language to make his manipulation seem like healthy relationship dynamics. Sarah realized that Marcus had been conducting a long-term psychological experiment with her as the primary subject. He had systematically tested her boundaries, measured her responses to different types of emotional stress, and documented her breaking points with scientific precision. The journal she had found contained detailed observations about which manipulation techniques were most effective on someone with her specific psychological profile and professional background. The most disturbing revelation came when Sarah discovered that Marcus had been gradually increasing the dosage of anxiety medication. He had been secretly adding to her morning coffee for months. Her recent memory problems, increased paranoia, and difficulty concentrating weren't symptoms of work stress as she had believed. They were the result of deliberate psychological and chemical manipulation designed to make her doubt her own perceptions and professional judgment. As Sarah pretended to plan their wedding while secretly building a case against him, she realized that Marcus was also escalating his criminal behavior. The murders were becoming more frequent and more brazen, suggesting that he was either becoming overconfident or preparing for some kind of endgame. Her analysis of the crime patterns indicated that he was building toward something bigger, possibly involving multiple victims or a more public display of his psychological dominance. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered that Marcus had been using her FBI access codes to gather information about active investigations. He had been logging into her secure databases using credentials he had stolen months ago, giving him inside knowledge about police strategies and evidence collection methods. This explained how he had stayed ahead of law enforcement for so long. He had been using her own professional resources to commit and cover up his crimes. Sarah's horror deepened when she realized that Marcus wasn't just using her for information. He was planning to frame her for the murders. She found draft documents on his encrypted computer suggesting that he intended to plant evidence linking her to the crimes while positioning himself as the concerned fiancé who discovered her supposed psychological breakdown. His plan was diabolically perfect, Who would suspect the expert profiler of being a serial killer when her own fiancé provided evidence of her deteriorating mental state? The psychological pressure of maintaining her facade while uncovering the extent of Marcus's manipulation was pushing Sarah to her emotional breaking point. She had to pretend to love and trust someone who had systematically destroyed her sense of reality while planning to destroy her life entirely. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment of forced intimacy felt like a violation that she had to endure for the sake of gathering evidence and protecting future victims. Sarah's professional understanding of psychopathic behavior became her lifeline during this psychological nightmare. She knew that Marcus derived pleasure from her ignorance of his true nature, which meant that maintaining her pretense of normalcy was crucial for her safety. She also understood that psychopaths often became violent when they felt their control slipping, so she had to be extremely careful not to reveal any signs of suspicion or fear. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Sarah realized that she wasn't Marcus's first target within law enforcement. Her research revealed a pattern of relationships with female professionals in criminal justice, psychology, and forensics relationships that had ended with the women either disappearing, dying in apparent accidents, or suffering psychological breakdowns that destroyed their careers and credibility. As Sarah gathered more evidence, she understood that she was dealing with someone far more dangerous than a typical serial killer. Marcus was a psychological predator who specifically targeted women in positions of authority and expertise, using their own professional knowledge and resources against them. He didn't just kill for the thrill of murder. He systematically destroyed women's careers, reputations, and sanity before eliminating them entirely. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Sarah like a suffocating blanket. She was trapped in a relationship with someone who had orchestrated every aspect of their life together, as part of an elaborate psychological torture experiment. Every happy memory, every moment of intimacy, every plan for their future had been calculated moves in a game where she was simultaneously the target and the unwitting participant. The psychological cat-and-mouse game reached a terrifying crescendo when Sarah discovered that Marcus knew she had found his storage unit. Hidden cameras had been recording her every move during what she thought was a covert investigation. Her worst fears were confirmed when she found footage of herself photographing his journal, her face clearly visible as she documented evidence of his crimes. The realization that he had been watching her discover the truth added another layer of psychological horror to an already nightmare situation. Marcus's behavior shifted almost imperceptibly after her discovery, but Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle changes. His smiles became more predatory, his questions more probing, and his physical presence more intimidating. He began testing her reactions with carefully planted references to the murders, watching her face for signs of recognition or fear. The psychological pressure was excruciating as Sarah realized she was now part of his twisted game, with her own investigation becoming entertainment for the killer she was trying to expose. The confrontation Sarah had been dreading finally came during what should have been a romantic dinner at their favorite restaurant. Marcus leaned across the table, his eyes reflecting a coldness she had never seen before, and whispered that he knew exactly what she had been doing. The mask of charm and normalcy dropped completely as he described in chilling detail how he had orchestrated their entire relationship as the ultimate psychological experiment on someone who claimed to understand criminal minds. Marcus revealed that choosing Sarah as his target had been deliberate and calculating. He wanted to prove that even someone with advanced knowledge of criminal psychology could be completely manipulated and controlled by a superior intellect. He had studied her published research, analyzed her case histories, and identified her emotional vulnerabilities before ever approaching her at that conference. Their relationship had never been real. It had been a 3-year psychological torture experiment designed to break down someone who dedicated her life to understanding people like him. The restaurant setting made the conversation even more surreal and terrifying. Surrounded by normal couples enjoying romantic dinners, Sarah found herself trapped in a psychological horror scenario that felt like something from her worst case studies. Marcus spoke about his murders with the same casual tone other people used to discuss weekend plans, describing the psychological techniques he used to control his victims before killing them. Sarah's training had prepared her for many dangerous situations, but nothing had equipped her to handle being the target of someone who understood her professional methods and personal psychology better than she understood herself. Marcus had turned her expertise against her so completely that she began questioning her own perceptions and professional judgment. The gaslighting had been so systematic and expertly executed that even knowing about it couldn't completely undo its psychological effects. As Marcus detailed his future plans for her, Sarah realized that her discovery of his crimes hadn't ruined his experiment. It had been the intended conclusion all along. He had wanted her to figure out the truth, because watching a criminal psychology expert realize she had been manipulated by a killer was the ultimate demonstration of his psychological superiority. The investigation she thought she had been conducting in secret had actually been orchestrated by Marcus as the final phase of his psychological torture. The evening took an even darker turn when Marcus revealed that he had been documenting every aspect of their relationship for a book he planned to publish posthumously. He intended to frame her murder as the tragic end of a brilliant psychologist who finally encountered a criminal mind superior to her own. Her death would become part of his legacy, a testament to his ability to outmaneuver law enforcement's best psychological profiler. Sarah understood that she was facing an opponent who had been planning this confrontation for years, while she had only discovered the truth recently. Every advantage she thought she had gained through her secret investigation had actually been part of his larger psychological manipulation. He had allowed her to find certain pieces of evidence while hiding others, controlling her investigation just as he had controlled every other aspect of their relationship. As they walked to Marcus's car after dinner, Sarah knew that this might be her last opportunity to escape. The isolation of the restaurant parking lot, combined with Marcus's newfound openness about his intentions, suggested that he was preparing to move to the final phase of his plan. Her psychological training told her that psychopaths often became most dangerous when they no longer needed to maintain their facade of normalcy. The drive home became a terrifying psychological assessment session in reverse, with Marcus analyzing Sarah's responses to his revelations while she desperately tried to find a way to survive the night. Every red light, every turn, every moment brought her closer to what Marcus had planned as the culmination of his 3-year psychological experiment with someone who thought she understood the mind of a killer. The final confrontation unfolded in their home, the same space where Sarah had lived in blissful ignorance for 3 years. Marcus had transformed from the charming man she thought she loved into the cold, calculating killer she had been profiling. As he revealed the complete scope of his psychological manipulation, Sarah realized that her survival would depend on using everything she knew about criminal psychology to outmaneuver someone who had been using those same principles against her for years. Marcus had planned for Sarah to discover his crimes, but he hadn't anticipated how thoroughly her FBI training would prepare her for this exact moment. While he had been conducting his psychological experiment on her, Sarah had been unconsciously analyzing his behavior patterns and identifying his weaknesses. The confrontation became a battle of psychological expertise, with both participants using advanced knowledge of human behavior to try to gain the upper hand. Sarah's breakthrough came when she realized that Marcus's narcissism was his greatest vulnerability. His need to demonstrate his intellectual superiority meant that he couldn't resist explaining every detail of his manipulation tactics, giving Sarah crucial information about his methods and future plans. She used his own psychological profile against him, feeding his ego while secretly recording his confessions on her phone. The psychological tables turned when Sarah began applying interrogation techniques she had learned from years of interviewing criminals. She appealed to Marcus's vanity, expressing admiration for his sophisticated manipulation strategies and asking for details about his methods. His narcissistic personality disorder made him unable to resist the opportunity to demonstrate his superiority, and he began providing details that would ultimately be used as evidence against him. Sarah's understanding of psychopathic behavior became her weapon as she maneuvered Marcus into revealing information about other victims and planned murders. She knew that his compulsive need for recognition and validation would override his caution if she presented herself as an appreciative audience for his psychological brilliance. The conversation became a masterclass in criminal psychology, with Sarah using her expertise to extract confessions while maintaining the facade of being an impressed victim. The climax came when Sarah revealed that she had been recording their conversation and had already transmitted the evidence to her FBI colleagues. Marcus's reaction confirmed everything she had learned about narcissistic rage and psychopathic violence. His carefully controlled facade shattered completely, revealing the true monster beneath the charm. But Sarah had anticipated this psychological breakdown and had prepared accordingly. The final moments of their confrontation demonstrated why Sarah had become one of the FBI's top criminal psychologists. She had used Marcus's own manipulation techniques against him, turning his psychological experiment into her investigative tool. When law enforcement arrived, they found a complete confession, documented evidence of multiple murders, and a psychological profile that would help them understand and prevent similar crimes in the future. Sarah's ordeal ended with Marcus's arrest, but the psychological scars of being manipulated by someone she loved would require years of therapy to heal. Her experience had given her unprecedented insight into the minds of both criminals and their victims, knowledge that would revolutionize how law enforcement approached cases involving psychological manipulation and domestic terrorism. The case became a landmark study in criminal psychology, demonstrating how expertise in understanding evil minds could be both a vulnerability and a survival tool. Sarah's experience proved that even professionals trained to recognize manipulation could become victims, but also showed how that same training could ultimately lead to justice and protection for future victims. As Sarah rebuilt her life and career after the trauma, she used her unique experience to develop new training programs for law enforcement, helping other professionals recognize the signs of psychological manipulation and protect themselves from becoming victims of the criminals they studied. Her story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of professional expertise when applied to personal survival. If you found this psychological thriller compelling, make sure to subscribe for more true crime psychology content. Share this story with others who appreciate complex criminal minds, and comment below about which psychological techniques you found most fascinating. The intersection of professional expertise and personal survival creates some of the most gripping stories in criminal psychology, and your engagement helps us continue exploring these dark but educational topics.